Admiral Jake Morrison stood at the command center window and watched his world die. The glass-like creatures called Zephyrians lay scattered across the battlefield like broken diamonds. Their blue blood mixed with the dirt and turned it purple. The squid-like Meridians floated in their water suits, but half of them were cracked and leaking. Their owners were already dead. The insect army called the Vex moved forward like a black tide. They had 6 legs each and mandibles that could cut through steel. Their eyes glowed red in the smoke. They made clicking sounds as they walked over. The bodies of Coalition soldiers. Jake had seen this sight on 12 different worlds. Each time the result was the same. "Admiral, we have maybe 2 hours before they break through the main gate," said Lieutenant Commander Lisa Barnes. She held a data pad with numbers that told the same story as the view outside. 80% of their forces were gone. The ammunition would run out in 30 minutes. The evacuation ships were still 3 hours away. Jake turned from the window. The command center buzzed with quiet panic. Zephyrian officers worked at stations with their crystal fingers moving fast over controls. Meridians floated in their mobile tanks and spoke in clicking sounds through translators. Everyone knew the truth, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Dr. Alex Carter ran up to Jake with sweat on his face. He was the only human in the Coalition base. The other species had agreed to let one human observer stay with them, but that was all. Humans were too dangerous, they said. Too violent, too unpredictable. "Admiral, the medical bay is full. We have Zephyrian soldiers with crystal shards through their bodies. The Meridians can't survive outside their water suits, and most of the suits are damaged. We don't have enough supplies to treat everyone," Alex said. Jake nodded. He had expected this. The Coalition fought wars like they lived their lives, with rules, with honor, with respect for all life. They would rather lose a battle than use weapons that caused too much pain. They would rather die than kill civilians. These values made them good people, but terrible warriors. The Vex had no such limits. They ate their prisoners alive. They destroyed entire cities to make a point. They bred faster than any other species and saw death as just another part of life. Fighting them with Coalition rules was like trying to stop a flood with a paper dam. An explosion shook the building. Through the window, Jake saw Vex warriors climbing over the outer wall. They moved like spiders, fast and sure. Coalition defenders fired energy weapons that made clean holes in their targets. The Vex fired back with bioweapons that dissolved, flesh and crystal alike. "Sir, we're getting reports from Sector 7. The Vex have broken through. Captain Morris is requesting permission to fall back," said Communications Officer Ben Taylor. "Granted. Pull everyone back to the inner perimeter," Jake said. Lisa Barnes looked at her data pad again. "Admiral, even if we hold the inner perimeter, we won't last until the evacuation ships arrive. We need those ships to come faster, or we need more troops." Jake knew she was right. He also knew that no more Coalition ships were coming. Every fleet was fighting somewhere else. Every world was under attack. This was the last stand for this sector, and they were losing it badly. Dr. Carter helped a wounded Zephyrian soldier walk past them. The soldier's crystal arm was cracked and leaking blue fluid. His species felt pain differently than humans, but Jake could see the suffering in his large, multifaceted eyes. "Doctor, how long can the wounded survive without proper medical treatment?" Jake asked. "The Zephyrians might last a few hours. The Meridians need their water suits fixed soon, or they'll die. We're doing our best, but..." Alex spread his hands helplessly. Another explosion, closer this time. The lights flickered. Through the communication system, Jake heard the sounds of battle. Coalition officers gave calm, polite orders even as they died. Vex warriors shrieked and clicked as they killed. Jake walked to a secure terminal in the corner of the command center. He placed his hand on the scanner and entered his personal code. The screen came to life with options he had hoped never to use. The emergency beacon system was meant for only the worst situations. It would send a message across space to every ship, every planet, every military base in known space. The message would go to Coalition allies and to species that had stayed neutral in the war. It would also go to Earth. Lisa Barnes saw what he was doing. "Admiral, The Coalition Council specifically voted not to involve the humans in our conflicts. They said humans were too dangerous, too unpredictable. The Council isn't here watching their people die, Jake said. His finger hovered over the activation switch. Dr. Carter looked up from helping the wounded soldier. Admiral, I need to tell you something about my people. We're not like the Coalition species. We don't fight fair. We don't follow the same rules. If you call for human help, you might not like what you get. Jake looked out the window again. Vex warriors were now visible in the courtyard below. They dragged Coalition prisoners behind them. Some of the prisoners were still alive and screaming. Doctor, how do humans fight when their backs are against the wall? Alex was quiet for a moment. We fight like cornered animals. We use every dirty trick we know. We hurt the enemy in ways that would make Coalition species sick. We don't stop fighting until we win or until we're all dead. And do you win? Usually. Jake pressed the activation switch. The beacon came to life with a deep humming sound. The message was already prepared, written months ago when the war started going badly. This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the Coalition Defense Force. All hope is lost. Our forces are destroyed. The enemy is at our gates. We are calling for immediate assistance from any available forces. We are especially calling for help from the human military. Send the Deathworlders. The message repeated itself 3 times and then launched into space faster than light. In a few hours, it would reach every major military base in the galaxy. Jake looked at his officers. The Zephyrians clicked their mandibles nervously. The Meridians bubbled in their tanks. Sir, what do we do now? Asked Lisa Barnes. Now we hold this position as long as we can. We keep our people alive until help arrives. And if help doesn't come? Jake watched Vex warriors pour over the walls like black water. Then we die with honor, and we hope someone remembers what we tried to do here. The battle for the inner perimeter was about to begin. The UES Titanfall dropped out of hyperspace like a metal mountain falling from the sky. The massive human warship was 3 kilometers long and covered in weapons that looked like they belonged in a nightmare. Gun turrets rotated slowly as the ship's sensors swept the Kepler system. Colonel Ryan Davis stood in the briefing room and looked at the holographic display showing Kepler 442b. Red dots marked Vex positions. Blue dots showed Coalition survivors hiding in underground bunkers. The situation was worse than the emergency message had described. Gentlemen, ladies, we have a problem, Ryan said to his officers. The Coalition forces are down to maybe 500 survivors. The Vex have control of the entire planet's surface. They're preparing to glass the world from orbit. Captain Nicole Foster studied the tactical display. She commanded the ship's Marine Battalion and had fought Vex before. Sir, the Coalition survivors are scattered across 12 different locations. The Vex have them surrounded at each site. Sergeant Danny Hughes grinned as he checked his rifle. The weapon fired explosive rounds that could punch through armor, plating. It was illegal by Coalition standards but perfectly normal for human military. Sounds like target practice to me, ma'am. Ryan pointed to the largest concentration of survivors. Admiral Morrison and about 200 Coalition troops are here, in the old mining complex. Dr. Carter is with them. Our job is to get them out alive and push the Vex off this rock. Major Kelly Roberts raised her hand. She led the Special Operations Unit, soldiers trained for missions that other species would consider impossible. Sir, what are our rules of engagement? There are no rules of engagement. The Coalition tried fighting with rules and they got slaughtered. We're going to fight like humans. The room was quiet for a moment. Every soldier there understood what that meant. They would use weapons that caused unnecessary suffering. They would target enemy morale as well as enemy soldiers. They would do things that would horrify their Coalition allies. Lieutenant Tony Martinez looked at the planet below through the viewing port. His Marines were loading into drop pods, getting ready for a combat insertion that would have been suicide for any other species. Colonel, what's our casualty estimate? 30 to 40% loss is minimum, maybe higher. Ryan said it like he was discussing the weather. The Coalition species would have called off the mission at those numbers. Humans considered it acceptable for a critical objective. The difference in thinking went deeper than tactics. It was about what each species was willing to sacrifice to win. On the planet below, Dr. Alex Carter sat in a bunker carved from solid rock. Coalition soldiers lay on makeshift beds around him. The Zephyrian wounded clicked softly in pain. The Meridians floated in damaged water suits that leaked constantly. Admiral Jake Morrison walked over to Alex. The Coalition officer looked older than his years. 3 days of constant battle had worn him down to nothing. "Doctor, your people responded to our message. We detected a human fleet dropping out of hyperspace an hour ago," Jake said. Alex looked up from bandaging a Zephyrian soldier's crystal arm. "How many ships?" "One." "Just one ship?" Jake looked confused. "We sent a distress call for an entire planet. The humans sent one ship?" Alex smiled for the first time in days. "Admiral, you don't understand how humans think about warfare. We don't send big fleets to solve problems, we send the right tool for the job. That one ship probably carries more firepower than your entire Coalition fleet." Above them, the UES Titanfall began launching drop pods. Each pod carried 20 Marines in full combat armor. The pods fell toward the planet like metal rain, their heat shields glowing red as they hit the atmosphere. Captain Foster watched the tactical display as her Marines approached the surface. Vex forces were moving to intercept the landing zones, just as she had expected. The Vex were good fighters, but they were predictable. "All units, this is Blackbird Actual, remember your briefings. The Vex fight like insects because they think like insects. They focus on the immediate threat, we're going to use that against them." The first wave of drop pods slammed into the ground in Vex rear areas. Marines poured out of the pods before they stopped smoking. They carried weapons that fired depleted uranium rounds and energy blasts that could melt steel. Sergeant Hughes led his squad toward a Vex communication hub. The insect warriors guarding it were surprised to see humans attacking from behind. They were even more surprised by how fast the humans moved and how much punishment they could take. A Vex warrior's bioweapon hit Hughes in the chest. The acid ate through his armor and burned his skin. A Coalition soldier would have fallen back to get medical treatment. Hughes kept fighting and killed the Vex warrior with his combat knife. Major Roberts and her special operations team moved through the Vex lines like ghosts. They used stealth technology that bent light around them. They planted explosives and communication jammers. They gathered intelligence about Vex positions and weak points. The Vex had never fought an enemy like this. Coalition forces attacked military targets and avoided civilian areas. Humans targeted supply lines, communication networks, and anything that would cause maximum disruption to enemy operations. In the bunker, Alex Carter listened to radio reports from the human forces. The language was different from Coalition military communications. Humans used code words that sounded like poetry, but described horrible violence. "Blackbird 2-6, this is Reaper Actual. We have eyes on the package. Requesting immediate fire. Support on coordinates Tango 79er. Reaper Actual, Blackbird 2-6. Fire mission approved. Danger close." Alex translated for Admiral Morrison. "The humans have located your position. They're calling for artillery support very close to enemy forces near you." "How close is very close?" Jake asked. "Close enough that Coalition forces would never attempt it. The risk of friendly fire casualties would be too high." The artillery strike came from the Titanfall's main guns. Energy beams lanced down from orbit and turned Vex positions into smoking craters. The shots landed within 50 meters of the Coalition bunker. The ground shook, and dust fell from the ceiling. Lieutenant Martinez led his Marines in a direct assault on the Vex forces surrounding the mining complex. They moved in small groups and used the terrain to their advantage. When they took casualties, they kept advancing. When they ran low on ammunition, they used weapons taken from dead enemies. The Vex began to experience something they had rarely felt in this war: uncertainty. The humans fought in ways that made no tactical sense by Vex standards. They took risks that should have gotten them all killed. They seemed to become more dangerous when they were wounded. Captain Foster coordinated the assault from her command post. She watched casualty reports climb steadily and felt no emotion about it. Every soldier who died bought time and space for the survivors to escape. This was how humans thought about warfare. In the bunker, Admiral Morrison watched human soldiers pour through the breach in the Vex lines. They moved differently than coalition troops. They were faster, more aggressive, and seemingly unconcerned about their own safety. A human Marine ran up to Jake and Alex. Blood covered his armor, but he was still fighting. "Admiral Morrison? Colonel Davis sends his compliments. We're here to get you out." Jake looked at the young soldier. "Son, you're wounded. You should get medical treatment." The Marine looked confused. "Sir, I can still fight. The medics will patch me up later." This was the difference between humans and the coalition species. Coalition soldiers fought until they were too injured to continue. Humans fought until they were too dead to continue. Dr. Carter gathered his medical supplies and prepared to leave the bunker. He had watched 3 days of coalition defeat turn into human victory in less than 6 hours. The cost was terrible, but the result was undeniable. The evacuation began as human forces carved a corridor through the Vex lines. Coalition survivors moved toward the landing zone, while Marines held the perimeter. The sounds of battle echoed across the planet as more human forces landed and engaged enemy positions. Admiral Morrison looked back at the bunker that had been their refuge and their prison. 3 days ago, he had thought all hope was lost. Now, he was walking toward safety under the protection of soldiers who fought like demons and died like heroes. The storm had arrived, and it was more terrible and more beautiful than anyone had imagined. The orbital bombardment began at exactly 4 a.m. local time. Colonel Ryan Davis had chosen the hour carefully. Most Vex warriors would be in their rest cycle, and the darkness would hide human troop movements. The first energy beams fell from the Titanfall like pillars of white fire. But Ryan did not target the obvious military positions. Coalition forces would have aimed at Vex command centers and weapon emplacements. Humans aimed at supply depots, communication relays, and transportation hubs. They wanted to create chaos and confusion, not just destroy enemy soldiers. Lieutenant Tony Martinez crouched in his drop pod as it fell toward the planet's surface. Around him, 19 other Marines checked their weapons one final time. The pod shook and bucked as it hit the atmosphere. Red warning lights flashed and the temperature rose quickly. 30 seconds to impact, called the pod's computer voice. Prepare for combat deployment. Tony looked at his Marines. Most of them were young, barely out of training. They were about to be thrown into a battle that would test everything they had learned. Some of them would not live to see the sun rise. The pod slammed into the ground behind Vex lines with enough force to crack the armor plating. The doors blew open, and Marines poured out into the pre-dawn darkness. Energy weapons lit up the area. As Vex warriors responded to the sudden attack, Sergeant Danny Hughes rolled out of his pod and immediately started shooting. His rifle fired explosive rounds that sent Vex body parts flying through the air. A bioweapon splashed against the ground next to him, eating through the metal and stone like acid. Contact left! Contact left!" shouted Private Bobby Clark. The young Marine fired his weapon in controlled bursts while moving toward cover. A Vex warrior jumped at him with mandibles spread wide. Bobby's bayonet caught it in the center of the chest. The fighting was nothing like the clean, honorable combat the Coalition preferred. Humans used every dirty trick they knew. They threw grenades into Vex bunkers and then shot the survivors as they tried to escape. They used flamethrowers to clear buildings and booby traps to deny territory to the enemy. Captain Nicole Foster watched the battle from her command post aboard the Titanfall. Status reports came in from a dozen different landing zones. Her Marines were taking heavy casualties, but they were achieving their objectives. The Vex defense network was falling apart under the coordinated assault. "Ma'am, 3rd Platoon reports they've secured the communication hub. They're requesting permission to move on the supply depot," said Communications Specialist Amy Bell. "Granted. Tell them to use maximum force. I want that depot turned into a smoking crater." Major Kelly Roberts led her Special Operations team through the Vex rear areas like hunters stalking prey. They moved without sound and struck without warning. Their mission was to plant psychological warfare equipment in key locations around the battlefield. Kelly's team set up speakers that would broadcast human music mixed with recordings of dying Vex warriors. The sounds would be transmitted on frequencies that Vex could hear, but Coalition species could not. The goal was to create fear and uncertainty in enemy ranks. Reaper 1. This is Ghost Actual. Package is delivered. The party should start in about 10 minutes, Kelly reported over her radio. In the Coalition bunker, Dr. Alex Carter listened to the sounds of battle growing closer. Human weapons made different sounds than Coalition energy weapons. They were louder, more violent, and seemed designed to frighten as well as kill. Admiral Jake Morrison stood next to Alex and tried to understand what was happening. The tactical display showed human forces attacking from 6 different directions. They seemed to have no central plan, no coordinated strategy. Doctor, your people appear to be fighting without any overall command structure. Each unit is operating independently, Jake said. Alex smiled grimly. Admiral, that's exactly how we fight. Coalition forces need detailed plans and careful coordination. Humans train every soldier to think for themselves and adapt to changing situations. We call it organized chaos. The psychological warfare equipment activated at exactly 5 in the morning. Suddenly, every Vex position on the planet was filled with the sound of human death metal music, mixed with the screams of their own species. The noise was loud enough to be heard over the battle and designed to create maximum psychological impact. Sergeant Hughes led his squad in an assault on a Vex strongpoint. The enemy warriors inside were disoriented by the sounds coming from their own communication systems. They stumbled and fired wildly as Marines poured through their defenses. That's what I'm talking about, Hughes shouted as he threw a grenade into a Vex bunker. The explosion sent insect bodies flying in all directions. Nothing like a little music to set the mood. The Vex commanders tried to coordinate their defense, but human jamming equipment made communication almost impossible. Individual Vex units fought bravely, but they had no idea what was happening in other parts of the battle. They were fighting blind against an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. Lieutenant Martinez reached the Coalition bunker just as the sun began to rise. His Marines had fought through 3 kilometers of enemy territory in less than 2 hours. Half of his original force was dead or wounded, but they had completed their mission. Admiral Morrison? I'm Lieutenant Martinez, United Earth Marines. We're here to get you out of this place. Jake looked at the young officer. Martinez's armor was scorched and dented. Blood seeped from wounds in his arms and legs. By Coalition standards, he should have been in a medical facility, not leading a combat mission. Lieutenant, you're wounded. Shouldn't you be receiving medical treatment? Martinez looked confused. Sir, it's just a scratch. I can still fight. Dr. Carter helped load wounded Coalition soldiers onto human transport vehicles. The Marines worked alongside him without complaint, even though many of them were injured themselves. They treated Zephyrian and Meridian wounded with the same care they gave their own people. Private Clark carried a wounded Zephyrian soldier whose crystal body was cracked in 3 places. The soldier was twice Clark's size and heavy as stone, but the young Marine refused to put him down or rest. Easy there, big guy. We're going to get you fixed up, Clark said to the Zephyrian. The alien soldier could not understand English, but he recognized the tone of voice. It was the same gentle sound Coalition medics used. Captain Foster coordinated the evacuation while continuing to direct the assault. More human forces were landing every hour, and the Vex defense was beginning to collapse completely. The enemy was retreating to prepared positions in the planetary capital. All units, this is Blackbird Actual. Phase 1 is complete. Begin Phase 2 operations. I want that city surrounded by nightfall. The battle for Kepler 442b had turned into a rout. Vex forces that had seemed unstoppable 3 days earlier were now retreating in confusion and panic. The difference was not just in weapons or tactics. It was in the fundamental approach to warfare. Coalition forces fought to minimize casualties and achieve limited objectives. Humans fought to break the enemy's will to resist. They were willing to take terrible losses to achieve total victory. Admiral Morrison watched human soldiers advance across terrain that Coalition forces had considered impassable. They moved through enemy fire like it was rain. They treated wounds that would have ended a Coalition soldier's career as minor inconveniences. Doctor, how do your people endure such casualties and continue fighting? Jake asked. Alex watched a Marine help a wounded comrade walk toward the evacuation zone. Both soldiers were bleeding, but neither was complaining or asking for medical attention. Admiral, humans come from a world where everything tries to kill us. We evolved as predators in an environment that demanded constant struggle. For us, casualties are not a reason to stop fighting. They're a reason to fight harder. The evacuation convoy began moving toward the landing zone as human forces established a corridor of safety. Coalition survivors rode in armored vehicles while Marines provided security on foot. The sounds of battle continued in the distance as more human units engaged Vex positions. Dr. Carter sat in a transport vehicle next to Admiral Morrison and watched the landscape pass by. The ground was covered with the wreckage of 3 days of fighting. Vex and Coalition bodies lay scattered among destroyed vehicles and ruined buildings. But now, human soldiers moved across the same ground with confidence and purpose. They advanced through areas that had been considered too dangerous for Coalition forces. They fought in ways that would have horrified Coalition commanders, but that achieved results no one could deny. The storm had broken over the Vex positions with devastating effect. But as the Coalition survivors were learning, human warfare was a double-edged weapon. It could save allies and destroy enemies, but the cost was always higher than anyone wanted to pay. The real test would come when the storm finally passed, and both sides had to live with what it had left behind. Colonel Ryan Davis stood in the medical bay of the UES Titanfall and watched human doctors work on Coalition wounded. The sight troubled him in ways he had not expected. Zephyrian soldiers with shattered crystal bodies lay next to human Marines with missing limbs. Both species were receiving the same care, but the difference in their responses was striking. The Zephyrians clicked softly in pain and tried to thank every medic who helped them. The humans gritted their teeth and asked when they could return to duty. Dr. Alex Carter moved between the beds, serving as translator and trying to bridge a gap that seemed to grow wider every hour. "Colonel, we need to talk," Alex said as he approached Ryan. The human doctor looked exhausted. 3 days of combat medicine had worn him down to nothing. Ryan nodded and followed Alex to a quiet corner of the medical bay. Around them, the sounds of medical equipment mixed with the soft conversations of wounded soldiers. "What's on your mind, Doctor?" "Sir, the Coalition survivors are grateful for our help, but they're also terrified of us. They've never seen anything like human combat methods. Some of them are asking if we're really the good guys in this war." Ryan looked back at the wounded soldiers. A human Marine was helping a Zephyrian soldier drink water while a medic worked on the alien's injuries. The Marine's own arm was in a sling, but he ignored his pain to help someone else. "Dr. War is not about being good or bad, it's about surviving and protecting the people you care about. We did what was necessary to win." "But at what cost, sir? We've taken 60% casualties. That's 3 times higher than any Coalition force would accept. We're asking our people to die for aliens they've never met." Ryan was quiet for a moment. The question went to the heart of human military philosophy. Other species fought wars to achieve specific objectives with minimal losses. Humans fought wars to break the enemy's ability and will to resist regardless of the cost to themselves. Major Kelly Roberts entered the medical bay carrying a data pad full of intelligence reports. Her special operations team had been gathering information about Vex activities in the planetary capital. What they found was worse than anyone had expected. "Colonel, you need to see this," Kelly said. She showed Ryan satellite images of the Vex command complex. "They're preparing to deploy a biological weapon. Intelligence estimates it will render the entire planet uninhabitable within 72 hours. Ryan studied the images. The Vex were building launch platforms for bioweapons that would spread deadly organisms through the atmosphere. If they succeeded, every living thing on Kepler Forum 42b would die within days. "What are our options, Major? We can evacuate everyone and let them glass the planet. Or we can assault the command complex and try to stop them. The problem is, it's a fortress. We'd have to go through 5 kilometers of prepared defenses." Dr. Carter looked at the intelligence reports. The Vex command complex was built into a mountain and protected by automated weapons systems. Assaulting it would be suicide for conventional forces. "Colonel, the Coalition fleet could bombard the complex from orbit. It would destroy the bioweapons, but also kill any Coalition prisoners the Vex might be holding inside." Ryan shook his head. "The Coalition would never authorize that kind of strike. They won't risk civilian casualties even to save the planet. Then what do we do, sir? Ryan looked at the wounded soldiers around him. Human Marines lay next to coalition troops, all of them paying the price for decisions made by people who would never see a battlefield. The choice was simple but terrible. We assault the complex, we go in on foot and destroy the bioweapons before they can be deployed. Kelly stared at him. Sir, that's a suicide mission. We'd be asking our people to walk into a meat grinder. Major, what do you think would happen if we let the Vex deploy those weapons? Every coalition world in this sector would be next. Billions of innocent people would die. Admiral Jake Morrison entered the medical bay accompanied by several coalition officers. They had been transferred to the Titanfall for their safety, but the experience of being aboard a human warship was unsettling for all of them. The coalition officers looked around the medical bay with obvious discomfort. Human military medicine was far more aggressive than what they were used to. Doctors performed surgery under combat conditions and sent soldiers back to duty with injuries that would have ended coalition careers. Colonel Davis, we need to discuss the tactical situation, Jake said. Our analysts believe the Vex are preparing a final offensive. They want to destroy everything before they retreat. Ryan showed Jake the intelligence reports about the bioweapons. The coalition officers read the information with growing horror. They had never encountered weapons designed to sterilize entire planets. Admiral, what would coalition forces do in this situation? Jake was quiet for a long time. The question forced him to confront the fundamental difference between human and coalition approaches to warfare. We would evacuate as many people as possible, and then request a diplomatic solution. We would try to negotiate with the Vex leadership. And, if negotiation failed, we would accept the loss of the planet rather than risk the casualties required to stop them. Dr. Carter listened to this conversation with growing unease. He understood both perspectives, but he also knew that only one would save lives in the long run. Admiral, humans don't negotiate with genocidal enemies. We kill them before they can hurt innocent people. Captain Nicole Foster joined the group and reported on the current tactical situation. Her Marines had established a perimeter around the coalition evacuation zone, but Vex forces were massing for a final attack. Sir, we're detecting movement from multiple Vex positions. They're bringing up heavy weapons and biological warfare units. It looks like they're preparing to hit us with everything they have. Ryan studied the tactical display. The Vex were going to launch simultaneous attacks on human positions while activating their bioweapons. They wanted to kill the rescue force and destroy the planet at the same time. Captain, what's your assessment of our ability to hold the perimeter? We can hold for maybe 6 hours against a full assault. But if they use bioweapons, everyone dies regardless of who wins the battle. The coalition officers looked at each other nervously. They were trained soldiers, but they had never faced a situation where every option led to massive casualties. Private Bobby Clark entered the medical bay carrying a wounded Meridian soldier. The aquatic alien's water suit was damaged and leaking. Clark had jury-rigged a temporary repair that kept the Meridian alive during transport. Where do you want this guy, Doc? Bobby asked Dr. Carter. Put him on bed 7. The medics will fix his suit. Alex watched Bobby gently place the wounded alien on a medical bed. The young Marine's own uniform was torn and blood-stained, but he had carried the Meridian for 2 kilometers without complaint. Admiral Morrison watched this interaction with fascination. Human soldiers showed the same compassion for enemy wounded as they did for their own people. They would torture prisoners for information and then risk their lives to save those same prisoners from bleeding to death. Doctor, I don't understand. Your people, they fight like savages but act like saints. How do you reconcile such contradictory behavior? Alex thought about the question for a moment. Admiral, humans are capable of both extreme violence and extreme compassion. We can kill enemies without mercy and then die to save strangers. It's not contradictory. It's human. Ryan made his decision while listening to this conversation. The mission was clear even if the cost was terrible. All units, this is Blackbird Actual. We are going to assault the Vex command complex at 600 hours. Mission priority is destruction of bioweapon facilities. This is a volunteer mission only. Any Soldier who wants to withdraw will be transferred to evacuation duty, with no questions asked. The medical bay fell quiet. Everyone understood what Ryan was really saying. He was asking for volunteers for a suicide mission. The odds of survival were almost zero, but the alternative was the death of an entire planet. Sergeant Danny Hughes was the first to respond over the radio. Blackbird Actual, this is Bulldog Squad. We're in. One by one, every human unit on the planet volunteered for the mission. Marines, Army Rangers, Navy Special Operations, they all accepted the assignment. Despite knowing they would probably die, Admiral Morrison listened to the radio traffic with amazement. No coalition force would volunteer for a mission with such low survival odds, but every human soldier on the planet had just accepted certain death to save people they had never met. Colonel, why are your people willing to die for us? We're not even the same species. Ryan looked at the wounded soldiers around them. Human Marines shared their rations with coalition troops. Medics worked on alien injuries with the same care they gave their own wounded. In the middle of a war zone, two different species had found common ground in their shared suffering. Admiral, humans believe that some things are worth dying for. Freedom is worth dying for. Justice is worth dying for. And sometimes, saving innocent lives is worth dying for. The countdown to the final assault began as human forces prepared for a mission that would determine the fate of an entire world. The price of victory was becoming clear, but so was the cost of failure. The assault on the Vex command complex began at dawn with an artillery barrage that turned the mountainside into a wall of fire. Colonel Ryan Davis led the attack personally, knowing that conventional tactics would fail against an enemy that had nothing left to lose. The bioweapon launchers were buried deep in the mountain, protected by 5 kilometers of tunnels and automated defenses. Lieutenant Tony Martinez and his Marines advanced up the slope under heavy fire. Vex warriors poured out of hidden bunkers and attacked with desperate fury. They knew that losing this battle meant the end of their invasion, and they fought like cornered animals. "Contact front! Contact front!" shouted Private Bobby Clark as he dove behind a boulder. A Vex bioweapon splashed against the rock next to him, eating through the stone like acid. Bobby rolled to his left and fired 3 shots into the alien warrior's center mass. Sergeant Danny Hughes led his squad through a maze of trenches, carved into the mountainside. Dead Vex warriors lay scattered everywhere, their bodies torn apart by human weapons. But more kept coming, streaming out of the mountain like black water. Bulldog 2, this is Bulldog Actual. We need fire support on Grid 77 Alpha. Danger close. Roger, Bulldog Actual. Shot out. The artillery round landed 15 meters from Hughes's position, close enough to shower his squad with dirt and rocks. The explosion cleared a path through the Vex defenders, and the Marines charged forward into the smoke. Captain Nicole Foster coordinated the assault from her command post while monitoring casualty reports. The numbers were worse than anyone had predicted. Her Marines were taking 80% losses in some units, but they continued to advance. This was what human warfare looked like when everything was at stake. Major Kelly Roberts and her special operations team infiltrated the command complex through ventilation shafts and maintenance tunnels. They moved like ghosts through corridors filled with Vex defenders, striking without warning and disappearing before the enemy could respond. Kelly's mission was to locate and disable the bioweapon control systems. Intelligence reports indicated the weapons could be launched remotely from the main command center. If her team could reach the controls, they might be able to stop the launch without destroying the entire facility. Admiral Jake Morrison watched the battle from the Coalition command post aboard the UES Titanfall. The tactical display showed human forces advancing through defenses that should have been impossible to breach. Coalition officers stared at the screen in amazement and horror. "Admiral, the humans have lost over half their assault force, but they're still advancing," reported Lieutenant Commander Lisa Barnes. "By our calculations, they should have withdrawn hours ago." Dr. Alex Carter stood next to Jake and tried to explain what they were seeing. "Admiral, Coalition forces fight to minimize casualties and achieve limited objectives. Humans fight to win, regardless of the cost. They would rather die than fail their mission." The bioweapon countdown reached 30 minutes as human forces battled through the outer defenses of the command complex. Vex warriors had set up barricades in every corridor and booby-trapped every room. The fighting was brutal, close-quarters combat that favored neither side. Lieutenant Martinez led his remaining Marines through a tunnel that reeked of death and decay. Vex bodies lay piled against the walls, and the air was thick with smoke from explosions. His original platoon of 40 soldiers was down to 12 men, but they kept moving forward. "Lieutenant, we can't hold this pace much longer," said Corporal Steve Wilson. The young Marine was bleeding from wounds on his arms and face, but his rifle never stopped firing. "We don't have to hold it much longer, Corporal, just until we reach the command center." Private Clark helped carry a wounded Marine while returning fire at Vex defenders. The soldier he was carrying had lost both legs to a bioweapon, but was still conscious and still fighting. This was the difference between human and coalition approaches to casualties. "Put me down, Bobby, I can still shoot," said the wounded Marine. "Shut up, Rick, you're going home in one piece if I have to carry you myself." Major Roberts and her team reached the bioweapon control room after fighting through 3 kilometers of tunnels. The chamber was filled with alien technology that pulsed with organic light. At the center of the room, a massive computer system counted down to weapon deployment. Ghost Actual to Blackbird Actual. "We've reached the package. Beginning disposal procedures now." Kelly's demolitions expert began placing charges while the rest of her team held the entrance against Vex reinforcements. The aliens threw everything they had at the humans, knowing that losing this room meant losing the war. The countdown reached 15 minutes as Colonel Davis and the main assault force broke into the command complex. They fought room by room through corridors filled with desperate Vex warriors. The aliens had nowhere to retreat and nothing left to lose. Ryan led his Marines through a chamber filled with bioweapon storage tanks. The sight made him sick to his stomach. Each tank contained enough biological agents to sterilize a continent. The Vex had been preparing for genocide on a scale that defied imagination. "All units, this is Blackbird Actual. Destroy everything in this facility. I don't want a single bioweapon surviving this assault." Admiral Morrison watched the final phase of the battle from orbit. Human forces were scattered throughout the command complex, fighting multiple battles simultaneously. The casualty reports were horrific, but the mission was succeeding. "Doctor, your people are winning, but at what cost? They've lost almost everyone." Alex watched a human medic work on wounded coalition prisoners that the rescue teams had found in Vex holding cells. The medic had been shot twice but continued treating alien wounded with gentle care. "Admiral, this is what humans do. We pay any price to protect innocent lives. We die so others can live." The bioweapon countdown reached 5 minutes as Major Roberts' team prepared to detonate their charges. The explosives would destroy the control systems and the weapons themselves, but they would also collapse the mountain on top of anyone still inside. "All units, this is Ghost Actual. Big boom in 4 minutes. Anyone who wants to live needs to get out of here now." Sergeant Hughes and his surviving Marines began fighting their way toward the exit. They carried wounded comrades and helped coalition prisoners escape from their cells. No one was left behind, even though staying to help meant risking death in the explosion. Private Clark and Lieutenant Martinez dragged a wounded Zephyrian soldier through the collapsing tunnels. The alien was too big for one human to carry, but they refused to abandon him. Behind them, the mountain shook as explosions destroyed the bioweapon storage areas. "Come on, big guy. We're getting out of here together," Bobby said to the Zephyrian. The alien soldier could not understand English, but he understood the determination in the human's voice. The final explosion destroyed the Vex command complex and collapsed half the mountain. The bioweapons were gone, along with most of the Vex leadership. The threat to Kepler 442b was over, but the cost had been terrible. Colonel Davis stood in the ruins of the complex and counted his survivors. Out of 800 Marines who had begun the assault, fewer than 200 were still alive. The casualty rate was the highest in human military history, but the mission had succeeded. Captain Foster coordinated the evacuation of survivors, while human medics worked frantically to save lives. Marines carried wounded coalition soldiers alongside their own injured comrades. The species barrier had disappeared in the face of shared sacrifice. Dr. Carter moved among the wounded and tried to process what he had witnessed. Human soldiers had died to save people they had never met. They had sacrificed themselves for principles that transcended species and nationality. Admiral Morrison walked through the field hospital and watched human and coalition medics work side by side. The barriers between species seemed insignificant compared to their common humanity. War had brought out the worst in both sides, but it had also revealed the best. "Doctor, I need to ask you something. Why did your people do this? Why did they sacrifice so much for strangers?" Alex looked at a human Marine who was sharing his rations with wounded Zephyrian soldiers. The Marine's own arm was broken, but he ignored his pain to help others. "Admiral, humans believe that all sentient life has value. We fight for freedom, for justice, and for the right of every species to exist. We die for these principles because they're more important than our individual lives." The evacuation ships arrived as the sun set over Kepler 442b. Coalition survivors and human wounded were loaded aboard the same vessels, treated by the same medical teams, and cared for with the same compassion. The war had ended, but the lessons would last forever. Ryan Davis stood on the bridge of the UES Titanfall and watched the planet disappear behind them. The mission was complete, but the cost would haunt him for the rest of his life. 800 good soldiers had died to save people they had never met. It was the kind of sacrifice that defined human character. Admiral Morrison joined Ryan on the bridge and looked out at the stars. The galaxy was safer now, but both men understood that safety had come at a terrible price. "Colonel, I want to thank you for what your people did here. You saved billions of lives." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "Admiral, we did what humans do. We fought for what was right, and we paid the price for victory. The real question is what